Welcome to U.S. History to 1877. In this course, you will survey the major themes, events, and ideas of American history through Reconstruction. I'm Jordan O'Connell, History and Government Instructor at Northeast Iowa Community College. This lecture distills a decade of my written notes taken from Alan Brinkley's The Unfinished Nation, The American Yawp, and our course-assigned OpenStax U.S. History textbook. This lecture focuses on military logistics and the crisis of 1776. The core question is this: how did arguments for independence hold the rebellion together before the Continental Army could prove it could win? The core competency is to paraphrase the colonial arguments that inspired the Declaration of Independence. How does a rebellion hold together when independence is declared before the Army can prove it can win? In January 1776, Thomas Paine published Common Sense in Philadelphia at a moment when the war against Britain had already begun, but the political endpoint remained unsettled. Lexington and Concord had been fought in April 1775. The Second Continental Congress had appointed George Washington commander-in-chief in June 1775. Bunker Hill had shown that large-scale bloodshed would follow. Even after those events, many colonists still hoped some form of imperial repair might remain possible. They distrusted Parliament, hated coercive measures, and resented British troops, yet they had not all concluded that monarchy itself must be discarded. Paine entered that uncertainty with a pamphlet built for speed, portability, and repetition. Printers could run it fast, writers and merchants could carry it, readers could recite it aloud in taverns, shops, and camp circles. The political effect came from timing as much as content. Congress needed public opinion to move farther than grievance. Local committees needed civilians to accept larger sacrifice. Soldiers needed language that made continued risk intelligible. Paine gave them a direct argument that separation from Britain was not a distant dream for philosophers. He argued that an island ruling a continent was a practical absurdity and that hereditary monarchy had no claim on American obedience. He wrote during a war that still looked breakable. That fact is decisive because the case for independence was made before any decisive military success guaranteed survival. The military setting sharpened every line of the argument. Washington had driven the British from Boston in March 1776 after Henry Knox hauled captured cannon from Fort Ticonderoga across snow and ice to Dorchester Heights. That success strengthened morale, but it did not settle the larger conflict. The British ministry still had the Royal Navy, professional regiments, German auxiliaries on the way, loyalist support in several colonies, and a command structure capable of shifting the war to New York, the Hudson, the Chesapeake, or the Southern coast. The Continental Congress had enthusiasm, committee networks, and provincial cooperation, but it lacked a stable treasury, a mature administrative apparatus, and long-term military contracts. When Paine argued for independence, he was writing into that imbalance. The issue was not whether complaints against British policy existed. The issue was whether colonists would accept a permanent break while British force still outweighed American resources. That is why the opening problem in 1776 is practical. How do leaders persuade ordinary people to support a declaration that invites harsher war before the new nation can prove it will survive the year? The world before the declaration was a world of incomplete commitment. Colonial assemblies had sent delegates to Congress, local committees had enforced boycotts and monitored loyalty, militia companies had answered emergency calls, yet militia service did not automatically become a durable national army. Men often enlisted for short terms, provincial loyalties remained stronger than any settled national identity. Supply officers struggled to gather tents, blankets, powder, salt meat, wagons, and horses from scattered communities that also had to feed families and maintain local economies. The British could move troops by sea along the coast, choose major points of attack, and draw on imperial credit. The Americans relied on state requisitions, private contractors, impressment of goods, local persuasion, and constant negotiation. Congress issued paper currency that depreciated as the war expanded. Officers worried about expiring enlistments almost as much as enemy movements. Washington understood that New York would become the next decisive theater after Boston. The city sat on a deep harbor, controlled approaches to the Hudson River, and could split New England from the middle and southern colonies if the British held it firmly. In the summer of 1776, British commanders William Howe and Admiral Richard Howe concentrated large forces on Staten Island and around the harbor. Their troops included veterans and Hessian auxiliaries. Washington placed the Continental Army around Manhattan, Brooklyn Heights, and the East River approaches, but the geography favored a Navy-backed enemy. At the Battle of Long Island in August 1776, the British used Jamaica Pass to turn the American flank. Washington escaped by organizing a nighttime withdrawal across the East River using boats under cover of fog and darkness. The retreat saved the army but cost the Americans control of Long Island. Further withdrawals from Manhattan, White Plains, and later Fort Washington followed. These were not glorious scenes. Men deserted, units dissolved when enlistments expired, supplies fell short. British success encouraged loyalists who believed imperial restoration remained likely. This sequence is decisive because the alternative to independence still existed in visible form. Loyalists could point to British military professionalism, naval reach, and American disorder. Merchants who depended on imperial trade could see ruin and prolonged rebellion. Families divided by politics could watch Congress demand more sacrifice while the army retreated. Even among supporters of resistance, many feared that a declaration without secure military footing might turn protest into treason without producing a viable state. Congress therefore needed to turn a weak strategic position into a stronger political one. Paine's pamphlet and the declaration later that summer did part of that work by reframing the war. If colonists remained only aggrieved subjects, then every retreat looked like failed petition backed by bloodshed. If they became a people defending independent statehood, then retreat could be absorbed as the cost of founding. The administrative weakness of the Continental cause therefore pushed political leaders toward a more absolute public claim. Several groups operated under distinct but connected pressures in 1776. Paine had to persuade readers who were angry yet uncertain Washington had to preserve the Continental Army when a single catastrophic defeat could end the rebellion. Congress had to speak for united colonies that still differed in economy, religion, class structure, and attachment to Britain. Loyalists had to decide whether Congress represented liberty or mob rule. Civilians had to decide whether they would part with grain, cattle, wagons, labor, and sons for a cause that had not yet secured victory. Paine worked through the print network of the largest city in British North America. Philadelphia had presses, booksellers, committee politics, shipping connections, and a literate public used to pamphlet controversy. Common Sense sold rapidly in multiple editions and spread through reprinting and public reading. That method spread the argument. A political argument does not need every colonist to buy a copy if one reader in a tavern, mess camp, or meeting house carries the lines aloud. Paine attacked monarchy, hereditary succession, and reconciliation. He linked delay to danger. He also spoke to material perception. Britain no longer looked like a protective parent after the fighting of 1775. It looked like a military power returning with larger force. Washington faced pressure from the arithmetic of war. The Continental Army had to keep men enlisted beyond the first emotional burst of resistance. Officers needed enlistment bounties, clothing, regular pay, and some promise of future land or pension to persuade soldiers to remain. Smallpox added another problem. The disease could incapacitate troops faster than musket fire. Washington, cautious at first, later supported inoculation on a wider basis because unmanaged disease threatened the Army's survival. That is military administration, not battlefield legend. So are shoes, cartridges, tents, and flour. Soldiers marched out of service as terms expired. Others slipped away when prospects looked dark. British occupation of New York made loyalism appear reasonable to some civilians, while American retreat fed gossip that Congress had overreached. The winter campaign of late 1776 and early 1777 showed how close the cause came to collapse. Washington retreated across New Jersey and over the Delaware River into Pennsylvania, with British and Hessian forces pressing behind. Many men had enlistments ending on December 31st. Congress fled Philadelphia temporarily for Baltimore. Yet Washington used speed and surprise to strike Trenton on December 26, 1776, capturing Hessian troops, then followed with the action at Princeton in January 1777. Those victories were limited in scale, but they restored morale, encouraged reenlistment, and showed that retreat had preserved an army capable of striking back. Paine's later series, The American Crisis, carried the same pressure work into the army camps. The opening line, "These are the times that try men's souls," turned hardship into civic endurance. The political and military efforts reinforced each other. Washington kept a field army alive. Paine kept the cause from shrinking to mere complaint. The primary source tension in Common Sense comes from its double task. It must attack monarchy as illegitimate while also making independence sound administratively necessary. Paine does both by collapsing political theory into memorable statements that ordinary readers could repeat. When he writes that there is something absurd in supposing a continent to be perpetually governed by an island, he translates imperial structure into geography and ridicule. A reader does not need legal training to understand the disproportion. Paine uses scale to turn distance into political nonsense. He also writes that Of more worth is one honest man to society and in the sight of God than all the crowned ruffians that ever lived. That sentence strips sacred aura from monarchy. Paine does not ask readers to negotiate with hereditary rule. He asks them to despise it. That move is decisive because colonial protest had long centered on rights within the empire. Paine shifts the ground. If monarchy is itself corrupt, then reconciliation stops looking prudent and starts looking degrading. The tension inside the source is that Paine writes as if independence is the obvious conclusion, while the material situation remained unresolved. The Continental Army had not won the Saratoga campaign. France had not yet signed an alliance. New York was about to become a disaster. Loyalists still saw British protection as safer than Republican experimentation. Paine's strength lies in answering that instability with a larger claim. Britain will not restore constitutional calm. Britain will keep sending force. Separation, therefore, becomes the more practical course because half-loyal rebellion is the least stable position of all. Congress later echoed that logic in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson's draft, revised by Congress and adopted on July 4, 1776, turned colonial grievance into a public statement of sovereignty. The Declaration listed injuries against George III, appealed to natural rights, and announced that the colonies were free and independent states. That language did not make the armies equal, but it did change the legal and diplomatic posture of the war. Foreign powers such as France could now treat the conflict as a struggle between states rather than a domestic disturbance inside the British Empire. The consequence of the 1776 decision was not instant stability. It was a new kind of commitment under worsening strain. British victories around New York and the fall of Fort Washington in November 1776 proved that the Declaration had not solved the military balance. Loyalist expectations revived in occupied areas. Civilians faced requisitions, inflation, disruptions to trade, and fear of invasion. Congress still struggled to coordinate war finance and interstate cooperation. Yet the decision for independence changed how these burdens were understood. Losses no longer appeared as failed petitioning inside empire. They became losses in a war for recognized sovereignty. That shift shaped 1777 and the years that followed. Saratoga in October 1777 helped convince France that the American cause deserved alliance. Valley Forge in the winter of 1777 to 1778 showed that training, discipline, and administrative persistence could hold the army together despite hunger and cold. Yorktown in 1781 later brought the military climax, and the Treaty of Paris in 1783 recognized independence. Those later milestones are easier to remember than the unstable months that came before them. Yet 1776 remains the hinge because it joined mass persuasion to military survival. The cause endured because words, institutions, and withdrawals worked together long enough for later victories to decide the outcome. The unresolved judgment is still difficult. Independence in 1776 can be read as moral clarity against monarchy, as military necessity once war made reconciliation less credible, or as a political gamble taken before the outcome justified the risk. The record supports all three elements. Paine sharpened the moral and political argument. Washington's retreats made clear that survival, not glory, would decide the first stage of the war. Congress declared a nation into existence before the army could fully defend it. That sequence is the point. American independence did not wait for certainty. It was argued into public legitimacy, while the military machine still looked fragile. Independence gained political legitimacy before the army could guarantee military security. The harder judgment is whether declaring a nation under those conditions was necessary courage or an immense gamble placed on fragile institutions and retreating troops. The Republic was argued into existence before it was fully defended.
If you're curious how I'm using AI to build these lectures and reshape higher education, visit thelibertytolearn.com. I'll see you in class.